Imagine, for just a moment, the fan scrutiny if Disney released a remake of the original Star Wars. I'm not talking about a sequel or a spin-off, but a complete reimagining of A New Hope. The same story, but new actors, new CGI, and a handful of tweaks to bring it into the 21st century. Well, that's pretty much what Atari has done with their new 2600 Plus. They've taken the world's most recognizable and beloved classic game console of all time and remade it. The same story, but with new internals, a new size, and a handful of tweaks to bring it into the 21st century. So how is this remake? Let's find out together right after this. This video supported in part by...
Playing VR, I tend to sweat. It gives me an edge. So King of Nerds happens to give me an edge too. Let King of Nerds give you the edge. Bye, King of Nerds.
Hey there, welcome back to GenXGrownUp. I am John and I am a GenXGrownUp. Thank you so much for clicking on this review. The 2600 Plus is far from the first device released that allows you to replay Atari VCS games, but those haven't been remakes of the classic. Not remaking Star Wars, more like making Hardware Wars or Spaceballs. Consoles in the image of the Atari video computer system, but not remaking the same thing again. Atari has set the bar pretty high for themselves here, so in this review, I'll be running through the hardware, the software, the gameplay experience, controller performance, and even touching on expandability, all in an effort to see how this remake stacks up to the legacy of the original 2600. Let's get started. Here are all the components that I will be using in my review of the Plus. Now this represents two products actually. You have, if you purchase the 2600 Plus, the base unit, it comes with a CX40 Plus joystick as well as this 10-in-1 cartridge. The additional thing that I have here is the paddle bundle. So you get this 4-in-1 paddle games as well as a set of CX30 Plus paddle controllers. Everything has a plus tagged on the end so you know it's newer and better. So let's start with the console. The front of the unit is adorned with that, was it cherry walnut or whatever, wood grain with the Atari logo. This time around though, the logo lights up when you power on the unit, which is actually a welcome addition. Here in the control deck, we have all those familiar grooves, and then we have the power on-off switch, which feel pretty much like the original, maybe a little bit tighter in general. You have a cartridge slot, which is full size, even though the whole console is only about 80% size. And then you have these momentary game select and game reset switches, and those feel just about perfect to my memory. Now around the back is where things start to get interesting and modern. Of course, this is powered with USB-C, so you're going to want to have a 5-volt, 2-amp or better power supply, standard. Here's your left controller port, standard 9-pin. Difficulty switches, both for left and right player, and here's that HDMI output, so you plug that directly into your HDMI TV. No more fiddling with adapters and stuff to try to get that old TV tuner into your modern television. And then all the way over here on the far right side of the back is the aspect ratio switch. Now this allows you to switch the output from 4:3 to 16:9. Don't do that. Never do that. You should never play these games in a stretched out mode. In fact, if you ever catch me at a convention or in public playing an Atari game in widescreen mode, remind me of this video and I'll hand you $1. This just should not be there. It's nice that they included it for those who would like to fill their TV with their game, but it's going to stretch it out and make it less like how you remembered, although again it will fill the television, I suppose. Then you have one included CX40 Plus joystick. Now, this feels and looks, to my memory and to my mind, and to putting it side by side with an old one, like a brand new CX40. Yes, it's a little rigid. Yes, it's a bit tough on your fingers. Yes, that's the way it's supposed to be. Has about a 5-foot cable on it, which means you're going to be sitting pretty close to your console. Something I actually appreciate, and I'll talk about a little bit later in the video, but I have no complaints about the CX40 Plus joystick. This is a great replacement for your real 2600 if you want, but it's also a wonderful controller for the Plus. And if you opt for it, the CX30 Plus paddle controller. This is a single Y branching paddle controller, about a 5 or 6 foot cable, and has 2 paddle controls here, so that you and a friend can play some of the games that are either your cartridges or on that 4-in-1. Now, like the CX40 Plus, the CX30 Plus, aside from being labeled as such, is almost indistinguishable from an original set of paddles that you would have gotten 30 plus years ago. And I talk about it more a little later in the video, but it's not just how it looks, but like the feel here, the resistance, that sort of thing is, again, perfect for what you want for your Plus and for playing old Atari 2600 games. Now, this is typically the part in the hardware overview that I would talk about what software is included, what's baked into the console. This isn't that kind of throwback console. This is intended to be a cartridge-based system. So if you turn it on with nothing in it, you're not doing anything other than looking at a black screen. What you actually need is a cartridge to plug in. Well, I don't know why you'd buy it if you have 0 cartridges, but if you do, the base unit comes included with this 10-in-1 Atari cartridge game, and then if you get the paddle set, it has this 4-in-1. Now there are some pretty amazing titles on here. You have Adventure, you have Yars Revenge, you have Combat, you have Missile Command, but then there's some notable absences, like you would include Haunted House and Real Sports Volleyball over Centipede and Asteroids? It just seems kind of odd. The way you switch between the different games is you throw these dip switches on the back, and there are 10 games included. And I noted right away that, hey, 10 games, 4 dip switches, that's 16 combinations. Could there be hidden games on here? I'm afraid not. I ran through hexadecimally all the combinations of 16, and once you get past the first 10, nothing included. So no bonus games, it's just that they needed that many dip switches to get to the 10 games they were going to include. The 4-in-1 paddle cartridge, similar story. Yeah, Breakout. Yeah, Video Olympics. That's got Pong on it. But as much as I like Night Driver and Canyon Bomber, I'm surprised you'd pick those over Warlords or Super Breakout. I mean, it's up to preference, and ultimately you can get your own cartridge. This also has the 4 dip switches on the back, and I tested. Only these 4 games are included. So that's what we're working with. This is the hardware we will be evaluating in this review as we move forward. Up next, I want to get into what it's like to launch and play games on the 2600 Plus. Before I do though, with the holidays upon us, I want to invite you to shop for the nerd in your life at our merch store. If you pop over to GenXGrownUp.com/merch, you'll find not only GenXGrownUp branded tees, stickers, hats, and more, but designs for just about anything you might be into, from retro games to game controllers to consoles. We've got it all, and of course, every purchase you make goes to support independent content creation, just like this review. All right, let's get to the games. Now, this isn't included software, but very recent software, and from Atari. You might recall these Atari XP cartridges. And while so much has been said comparing the 2600 Plus to the Retron 77, these didn't work in the Retron 77. And in fact, these XP cartridges were specifically called out by Atari in their publicity and their information saying, yes, of course, XP cartridges work. Now, all of these carts were designed with artwork forward instead of on the back or top, and then this illuminated top part here. So let's find out if these do in fact work on the Plus. Well, it lights up. That's a good start. And there it is. It does fire up and it does work. It would be a pretty big black eye if Atari didn't make sure that these re-release XP cartridges worked on their new Plus unit. I mean, there are a few problems we're going to find, but luckily, this internal one is not one of those problems. The experience of launching a game starts out exactly like it would have been on your old Atari 2600. You throw the cartridge in, you throw a little on button, and poof, there's your game. Except, poof, there's not your game. Instead, because of simulation, we start with an Atari logo. Then we go to a loading screen as it rips the image and brings it into emulation. And then there's a game. And then you get it. Now, once it's here, you have the game to play, and you're good. That little bit of time, though, it pulls me out of the experience just a little. Because, if you got an old Atari, you throw the cartridge through the switch, and boom, you're in the game. Not a complaint so much as it's observation, right? It's different. This is so close that little differences like that continue to jump out at me. Once you're in it though, and you have the controller in your hand, and you're playing the game, all of that kind of melts away. It feels just like I remember playing on my original Atari 2600. Now, the image coming out of this is crystal clear via HDMI, not that fuzzy, wobbly image you would have enjoyed coming through your TV tuner. Some people may like that. I personally, when I play in Stella, I like to have a little bit of that grain, a little bit of that noise and bleed over. You won't get that where pixels bleed on other pixels here. Now, that's a preference. You may like seeing each and every individual pixel crystal clear, but keep in mind, it is a difference. I'm actually quite happy that I'm playing these games on my little bench television that does not have crystal clear HDMI, so I actually get a little bit better experience for my tastes playing these 2600 games. Now, sometimes you insert a game and cross your fingers because it doesn't always launch right away the first time. You'll get this loading game failed, and we know the game works. it's that it's probably dirty. So you got to clean these old cartridges if you're going to try to use them, especially if you find them in used game stores. As I was going through my game collection, most of which hadn't been plugged into a console probably in decades, most of them were pretty filthy and often didn't launch the first time, but a little cleaning, again, fixes that. Now, of course, unlike the plug-and-play devices we've had recently, which games you can play here is entirely dependent on which games you own physical copies of. So if you want to play Space Invaders, you want to play Joust, you want to play Moon Patrol, you've got to have the cartridge. You've got to go find it. You've got to shop for it. Now, that's a key differentiator here, and one that dramatically contributes to the overall vibe of the 2600 Plus when looking at it in comparison to other devices that have come along recently. And what about those Atari 7800 games? Well, same deal. Put them in there, power on, wait for the Atari logo, and then cross your fingers and hope that you have properly cleaned the cartridge, because we know it's supposed to work. One of the coolest things about having 7800 game support on the 2600 is just how many great ports there were of arcade games for the 7800 that I never got to play. I had gone straight from the 2600 to a computer's, and I missed out on the 7800. Through the years buying up collections, I have accidentally gotten a small 7800 cart collection, maybe 10 or 20 games, and playing them now, they're great. Now, you know the sound chip is the same sound chip from the VCS, but the graphics are so much more powerful that, for the time, it even gave ColecoVision a run for its money in terms of arcade ports and accuracy. Now remember, for some 7800 games, you're going to need a joystick that has 2 discrete buttons. And that's not included with the default package when you buy your 2600 Plus. If you have a 7800 joystick, that works fine, but otherwise you're going to have to source one. Now, I would expect Atari is going to roll out a 7800 Plus joystick at some point just to give us the option, but for now you're going to have to bring your own controller to the party. Case in point, here's Dark Chambers, a great dungeon crawler that is leagues better on the 7800 than it is on the 2600. You need the second button to actually shoot, so without a 2-button controller, don't even bother firing this one up. Now, I also got the paddle bundle included with my 2600 Plus, of course, and so we got to check out some paddle games. These reissued CX30 Plus controllers I found to have both not only the look and heft of the original, but the correct feel, too. And I played a variety of paddle games, including those on the 4-in-1 cart, as well as a few of my favorites. Now, many viewers requested a Kaboom demo, which I agreed with, but then I realized I don't own a physical copy of Kaboom, so Eggomania served as a comparable stand-in, and I was able to catch eggs and successfully shoot that annoying bird, just like I remember. Now, of course, being Atari made, the shape and texture of the controller is right, but having the right click of the button and the right kind of drag or resistance to your turning the paddle feels the way I can't really describe, but you'll recognize it when you have it in your hand. Now, you may have noticed playing paddle games here, I have this little arrow of tape on the top of the paddle controller. Why? Well, of course, I'm doing some more bootleg science here. One thing that people want to know most about is latency of controllers. And the paddle is the best place to examine that. Here's what I've done. I put this little arrow at the top center of the paddle, and then I bumped up my camera to shoot at 8 times speed and slowed it down. I did the same test on both the CX30 Plus on the 2600 and the 2600 Plus. Now look, yes, the 2600 Plus is ever so slightly behind a real original hardware 2600, but it's so negligible. Based on this test, I'm going to say that this is the most accurate and least latency you'll ever get with a paddle, short of plugging a paddle directly into an original Atari VCS. Somehow, PlayOn and Atari have avoided the analog to digital conversion latency and given us a almost perfect response time that we would expect on the original VCS. I'm going to look at more controller stuff in just a second, but while I do have piles upon piles of cartridges, I don't have near the variety of like homebrew, PAL, cassette-based, or out-of-the-ordinary games as some of my fellow creators right here on YouTube. So, for a more in-depth look at game compatibility, I'm going to recommend you watch my buddy John Hancock's 2600 Plus review, linked here and in the video description. I talked to John about his review, and here's what he said.
The immortal John Hancock here, and I, on my channel, cover many things Atari. I've been a long time serious collector of everything from Atari to Xbox, and on my Atari 2600 review, I wanted to test as many controllers, homebrew games, and some of the things that were labeled untested. I did make a couple mistakes on my review. The Dragonfly Atari 7800 cart does work, loading official ROMs, as well as a Harmony cart. If you just load a single ROM into it, It does work on the 2600 Plus, but I wanted to share some details on the Atari 2600 Plus that maybe some others can't cover. Anyways, I love your channel and good luck on your review.
Aw, thanks, John. What a nice guy. Okay, let's dive into various game controllers and see how they work on the Plus. First and foremost, you'll be glad to hear that I've yet to find a standard Legacy 9-pin joystick designed for the 2600 that doesn't work properly on the Plus. So that's a good start. But what about some of the less standard controllers? And the first of those non-standard controllers I want to test is the keypad from Star Raiders. Now, to play Star Raiders, you need a standard controller in the left joystick port, and in the right joystick port, you need this really cool included Star Raiders keypad. It's got changing your views, your galactic map, hyper warp, and shields, for example, need to be turned on. Well, unfortunately, now Star Raiders works. It launches. All that's cool. I can move and I can shoot. What it can't do is anything on this keypad. Nothing here works. So effectively, even though Star Raiders is on the list of games you can play, because we do not support the keypad you need to do the functions in the game, it's basically unplayable. Another non-standard controller I was eager to try was the driving controller. Now, this is not a paddle. The driving controller can turn infinitely. It's a spinner, not a paddle, right? So it can turn all you want. And Indy 500 is the most notable example of a game people love that you just can't play properly in emulation because you don't have a driving controller. So, plugged it in, give it a shot. I can drive. The accelerator works, cannot turn at all. And in case you're wondering, John, does this controller work? Well, yeah. I plugged it into my 2600 Junior and played Indy 500 just fine. So why the driving controller, which is iterative of the paddle, not supported at launch on the 2600 Plus? Not sure. And another miss. Now, not to be all bad news, a lot of people asked about the Hyperkin Ranger, and this thing works great. A Frogger, of course, I'm not using the fire button, but trust me, it also works really, really well. And many people didn't like how short the controller cables were on the CX40 Plus. And these, of course, have a really long, like 6 or 10 foot cable or something, so a really good option. And not only does the joystick work well, when you switch it over to paddle mode and put in a paddle game, guess what? That works just as well as the paddle that comes included with the 2600 Plus's paddle bundle. And the Ranger being a combo paddle and joystick controller, a pretty good option if you're looking for a way to play multiplayer games and don't want to shell out the money for an extra CX40 Plus. And speaking of paddles, no test of a 2600 reissue would be complete without looking at Warlords. I can't tell you how many comments and videos I get from people saying, what's the best way to play 4-player Warlords on my big screen TV via HDMI? And none of the previous releases have really done that for us. So here I have 2 sets of paddles, both the CX30 Plus and some old CX30s. So let's see. Here's controller number 1. Working really well. Here's controller number 2, the blue one up there in the upper right. Here we have controller 3, that's the purple in the lower right. He's doing his job. And finally, controller 4, driving the green one. So, isn't it amazing that finally there is a way, now you have to get another set of paddles, but that's not so tough. You can play 4-player Warlords with paddles on your TV, just like you used to. That's a huge plus. So what about expansion? Now that's a hot button topic in Atari circles these days, and by now you've noticed the Plus doesn't have an SD card slot for expansion. It also doesn't have game saves or rewinds or any of the trappings of modern, inspired by, not remakes, inspired by consoles like the Plus. Now I'm sure within a few weeks, some industrious tinkerer is going to find a way to add ROMs to the Plus. But are you ready for a shock? I hope nobody does. When I review arcade game toys, I often talk about how well a gadget replicates the arcade experience. The Plus is doing that sort of thing here, but replicating the original Atari video computer system experience. Shuffling and sorting through a stack of cartridges, being tethered just feet away from the box connected to your TV because the cord is too short, having to reach over to the console and hit those game select and game start buttons. Every single one of those contribute to the genuine nostalgic Atari 2600 experience in a way that you just can't get from firing up a ROM on your phone. Now if, down the road, there becomes a way to expand the Plus, I'll probably try it, but in doing so, I will be diminishing the experience created by playing games on the Plus in the first place. So where does that leave us? How did Atari do with their Star Wars remake? Well, as it stands here, at launch, under firmware 1.00, I'm going to rate the Atari 2600 Plus 3.5 tokens out of 5. There is plenty done right here and plenty to love about this reissued console. And if you just want to play the most common Atari joystick and paddle games via HDMI, the Plus is not too bad. But in a few notable ways, I'm afraid Han didn't even get his blaster out of his holster here. To truly be the Star Wars remake Atari fans want, the Plus needs to do the things I can't already do in DIY emulation. And I already can't play Indy 500 or Star Raiders properly in other places. This remake needed to support not just most, but all things that make the original VCS such a legendary platform in order to be the breakout release Atari intended. Of course, many of these things, along with improved compatibility with more homebrew and PAL titles, can and should come along in future firmware releases. In fact, how Atari reacts to the launch with their first firmware update will speak volumes as to how this device is going to be supported in the long term. As usual, please watch for notes and updates to this review in the pinned comment down below. And in the meantime, I'm going to put links over my shoulders here and here to more 2600 Plus coverage I've done. I certainly hope you have found something to enjoy in this video though, and I cannot wait to talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.